December 7th, 1941. Most people remember Pearl Harbor at that time. Cleve was at Texas A&M, and like a lot of people, what they decided to do was drop out of school. In his case, he joined the Navy and was shortly thereafter commissioned. Stayed throughout the service, and at the end of the war, he actually joined the Army in the Counterintelligence Corps. And he was very interested in hypnosis, and he tells a story about using hypnosis for intelligence purposes. And one of them was that one of the senior generals was allowed to be hypnotized. And what he did was to take this individual, have him go to the safe, extract a top secret document, bring it to him, return it to the safe, and have absolutely no knowledge of the event. And he said, that really got their attention, that somebody could do those sorts of things. And because of that work that he'd done, he then joined the CIA in 1947, when the CIA had just been formed at that time. For 54 years, Cleve has been involved in polygraph. You can read any of the key books on the use of the polygraph, and particularly the zone comparison technique. They all come from him. Those of you that have special clearances have spent many happy days doing any times that while you're wired up there. So he actually started the program and has been instrumental in training most of the polygraphers in the United States, serving in the Department of Defense, many of the police agencies, both in the United States and around the world. Now, many of you have heard about the secret life of plants. He's going to talk a lot about that book and the plants. Now, Cleve did not intuit that plants could transmit information, all that. What he did, he actually asked a different question. Part of the polygraph is a galvanic skin response, something that measures moisture. And so he had this big philodendron in his apartment, and he said, I wonder how long it takes when you pour the water into the roots until it gets to the leaves.
John, it's going to take me a half hour to clean up your stories.
Well, the point was, what he noticed was the plants were responding to emotional stimuli in the area. And by the way, plant 001 still resides on the 5th floor of his plant today. So for 36 years, he's been involved in the plant research. Now, I came in this year, very early 80s. Cleve was under contract to me when I was with ISCOM. I had a laboratory there and replicated many of the experiments that you will see here. One of the key incidents, the one that I mentioned briefly in my talk yesterday, in 1986, the IRVA had asked the National Academy of Science to do a study of many of these technologies. And so I took them to Cleve because we had a system that was highly replicable and you could see some strange events. And what happened at that point, I won't go into detail, that would take another half hour, but the white crow flew right in front of the Academy and never to be mentioned again. So with that, I'll give it to
Thank you, John. Fortunately, I have Jim Kelly here to bail me out on the PowerPoint. I understood that we're supposed to have things on PowerPoint. And I had prepared a PowerPoint presentation for the University of Science and Philosophy, which used to be called the Walter Russell Foundation. And I'm using some of the PowerPoint work here also. But here they had given me sort of this title of communicating new discoveries to the old establishment. And I thought it should be changed to communicating old discoveries to the new establishment, which Okay, I thank John for that introduction, which I may have to do a little correction here and there. It was the General Secretary that I hypnotized. She took the highly classified document from his safe and gave it to me and had no memory of doing that. And then the next day, the General had been sort of dragging his feet a little bit on my research program at the Counterintelligence Corps Center. And so I took the document and I said, General, you're either going to court-martial me or you're going to listen a little better to what I'm trying to do. And so that was how that story, he didn't court-martial me. In fact, everyone got awfully excited, ended up with my going down to CIA to pursue that. So I cleaned up that a little bit on you, John. And it wasn't a philodendron plant, it was a Dracaena cane, okay, that has the long trunk and the long leaf, which was fascinating to me because I wanted to see how long it took the water to get from the root area of the plant all the way up that trunk and all the way down through the long leaf. That was at least my cover story for hooking it up the first time. Okay, backing up a little bit. The hypnosis connection, because I noticed that the title of my talk here seems to tie in a little bit with hypnosis, and actually I started working with hypnosis 63 years ago. That's before a lot of you were born, I think. 63 years ago. I was 16 years old at the time, and I was going to Rutgers Prep School in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and it would be the equivalent of my third year of high school. I had a little working scholarship where I went to prep school. And at that time, they had college students that would be on scholarship and would sit at the head of your table and tell, so, you know, we'd get in conversations and they would tell what went on in class that day. And this one particular day, the college student sitting at the head of our table said that in his psychology class, they had attempted to hypnotize someone, but it really hadn't worked. They had taken a gooseneck lamp and put a cardboard up against it with a little pinhole through it for fixed attention on that little pinpoint of light, made suggestions, and it all sort of bombed out to where there wasn't anything exciting that happened. But that evening, my roommate and I said, gee, that seems like a sort of a silly thing for them to be doing. These growing people, to us they were growing at the time. Let's try it. So we flipped a coin to see who was going to be the hypnotist and who was going to be the subject. Well, I won the flip for being the hypnotist, and I think I've never had anyone under as deeply as that person went under that first time. And I was too good at this. It must be from a past lifetime or something, because I said to the person, look, in order to have late lights at this prep school, you had to go down and sign a log in the hallway and ask the professor on duty permission to have late lights past 10 o'clock. So here this guy is in deep hypnosis, and I'm saying to him, I want you to open your eyes, act very natural, but you're going to go down to the end of the hall, sign up for late lights, and come on back. And so he opens his eyes and goes prancing down the hall, signs up, converses a little bit with the professor on duty, comes back. I said, now I'm going to have you close your eyes, and I'm going to count backward from 5 and have you be wide, wide awake, feeling perfectly normal and fine. I went 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He opens his eyes. He says, see, it's all a bunch of crap. And I said, uh-oh, something important is going on here. And I caught on right away that this could be very, very important. So I went to the college library and I studied up as much as I could about hypnosis at that time. In the meantime, the equivalent of my 4th year in high school, which I was then 17 years old, it was at the Franklin Marshall Academy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And there I started to do a fair amount of work with hypnosis. In fact, the school newspaper for this prep school was the Oval, and they've got science sees a boom and so forth and so on. And then they talk about my little presentation. I was already giving talks and demonstrations and doing some of the usual stuff of stretching somebody between 2 chairs, and they were so rigid you could actually sit on them, etc. Things that I learned later on it wasn't always good to do. You have to take it out of the performance idea and get it more into the scientific. But anyway, away I was going on the hypnosis. Now, in the meantime, Texas A&M University, here I'm up in New Jersey, where I was raised, in this lifetime anyway, and I must have been watching too many Westerns because I wanted to go to Texas University. So I was accepted there by mail. My folks gave me enough money for train fare, because back then it was trains were the way you went. And I got down to New York. I took the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western choo-choo train, that steam engine that went from Lafayette, New Jersey into Hoboken, took the ferry across, and it was either Pennsylvania Station or I believe it's or Central, one or the other, I forget now. I thought, this is going to be sort of a bore. I'd rather, see the country. So I went up in the Bronx and found somebody that would sell me a motorcycle with a payment plan. And I used the train fare for the down payment, got on the motorcycle. They pushed me out over Pulaski Skyway, and I finally, by the time I got down to Austin, Texas from New York, I really knew how to drive that motorcycle. My parents didn't even know I had the motorcycle for years. That's not, you better kill a kid if they do that to you. But anyway, this, this was my adventuresome spirit from way, way back. I'm just giving you a little historical idea of perhaps why I seized upon and recognized something going on when I started working with the plants. At Texas University, I stayed a semester here in Austin. That was September through December 1941. And then I matriculated over to Texas A&M, which was a very hazardous sport back at that time, because these were very competitive schools, and there was a lot of hazing that would go on. The big paddle that was used on underclassmen and all kinds of excuses. And when you moved over from Texas University to A&M, they were so highly competitive with their football team that you got a pretty rough time. But anyway, I lived through that. But when I was at A&M, I really, in earnest, started to fool with hypnosis. And how this ties into sort of the out-of-body experience or remote viewing, the news coverage of my work, my antics at A&M was in the Battalion, which is the publication for the school. And let's see, in March 7, 1942, 60 years ago, just to take out a quote, in a clairvoyance demonstration, the assistant, that's the hypnotic subject, looked through solid walls and told what was going on the other side, and was able to make his helper read through paper, that's me, read through paper, walls, or anything. What in hell was I doing with that back then? It didn't occur to me that you can't do this. It just, I would look for the best subject out of a whole number of subjects and use that best subject and just tell them to do these things. It wasn't a question of training, just, just under deep hypnosis, do this. And it would have surprised me if it hadn't worked. And another quote later on, this is in the October 15, 1942 Battalion, for those of you that want to hunt this up, a long time ago. Out of the quote, now I want you to your mind to mentally look behind you. Then you can tell me who you see and what he's doing. And the person did it. And then also another quote, several boys in Goodwin Hall, that's at Texas A&M, testified that during the A&M game of Corpus Christi and A&M, Backster had a boy under hypnosis who told many incidents about the game which were announced a few seconds later over the radio, because the radio was all there was then, right? And here I'm into some kind of remote viewing without making a big fuss about it, but I'm using the subjects that go under very, very deeply in hypnosis and just telling them to do it. Also mental travel while under hypnosis. I would say to a person that, okay, even though you're in this deep sleep, I want you to take a trip. You'll still be sitting here, but I want you to travel here. And I would lead the person over, down this street, down that street. And I'd say, now you're in front of the psychology professor's house. What's going on? The person would tell me if he had visitors. He'd never been inside the house. I said, go inside the house now and tell me what it looks like. And then take notes on this, go back to the psychology professor. I got A's in all my psychology classes. They let me, they let me teach suggestibility and so forth based on this. And this was my early experience using hypnosis for things that are very similar to many of the things that you're talking about. Here again, you had no way to accurately compile. Occasionally there'd be a miss, but there'd be an awful lot of successes. Now they'd have lots of controls and everything you put on this. But the point is that when you take a person under hypnosis, a very good subject, they're very, very suggestible, so you suggest to them that they can do this thing, and if we have this basic ability, the only thing that stops us from using it is self-doubt. So you can eliminate the self-doubt through hypnotic suggestion, and you can really make great strides. So that wasn't my main interest at the time. It was an oh, by the way thing that I sort of was interested in while I was using hypnosis. Now, Pearl Harbor came along, so I left Texas A&M right in the middle of the semester, in fact, to join the Navy. I was 18 at the time and certainly was going to be drafted, and I'd rather sort of make my choice. And when I got in the Navy, I wanted to get away from school and get into the war, but they just sent me back to a whole bunch of schools, including 3 semesters in what they called the V-12 program at Middlebury College in Vermont, where they allowed me to continue my psychology major. And they darn near schooled me to death, and I almost missed the war. I caught up with the war in the West Pacific toward the end. In fact, I was staging for the invasion of Japan when they dropped the bomb over there. I was on a 173-foot PC, which is the smallest metal ship at the time, loaded with communication equipment. We were supposed to go in and drop anchor and guide in the waves. Well, we would have been blown to kingdom come, I think, in minutes had that happened. And I certainly wouldn't be here today. Now, I got discharged from the U.S. Navy. I tried to interest them. I wanted to end up with naval intelligence, as they called it at that time, and try to use some of these capabilities. And the thing that worried me a good bit was the misuse of hypnosis by the enemy to create espionage incidents as far as our people were concerned. In other words, how can you tell if they have hypnotized somebody and are having them do acts of espionage under suggestion? The theory is a person won't do anything under hypnosis that they won't do normally. But there isn't a thing you can mention to me that I can't justify that they would do normally through the power of suggestion. Even murder. What do we do when we send them to war? They kill people, that's murder. So you just put the particular take on it, and I'm sure there's just most anything that could be accomplished, even though some people think you just wouldn't do that ordinarily. So this was on my mind, but I couldn't get them here. I'm an 18-year-old ensign, and they're not ready to listen to this kind of stuff, and I didn't get anywhere. I was a line officer in the Navy, and I had to wait until I was discharged, and I was out about 8 months, and I had a chance to enlist directly into the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps. And this had an appeal to me because it means I would be enlisting right into an organization that was involved in intelligence work, so there wouldn't be any question that I would be able to proceed. I went through their basic training in Fort Holabird near Baltimore, Maryland, and after I went through their basic course, they kept me on the interrogation as an interrogation instructor in the school teaching staff. And they gave me this little room where I could do some research with hypnosis. That led up to the story that John almost told to you. Okay, at that time they also gave me temporary duty orders for a 10-day trip to Walter Reed Hospital to teach psychiatrists hypnotic induction techniques, because at that time the medical people didn't believe in hypnosis, and you had to really convince them. Now it's the other way around. I think the medical people are pretty convinced. And that was the time. Then, of course, this came up about hypnotizing the commanding general, General Kaiser at the time, was head of the Counterintelligence Corps. He even gave me a nice favorable letter of recommendation after this, so I guess he wasn't too mad. But somehow the word leaked out, and it got down to CIA, which was very new. They had started in 1947. This was 1948. And they wanted me to come with them, so I had been given a regular Army Master Sergeant's rate based on my ensign's commission in the Navy, and I had a 4-year enlistment. And I wasn't interested in going with them as a Master Sergeant, and so they gave me a first lieutenant's commission, military intelligence, and discharged me, and then took me down there. I had a GS-15 billet that I worked into. I was starting as 11, got my 12, et cetera. So they got very excited about this whole thing. They did tell me when they called me in, they said, there's a little something in your background that we were a little surprised about, and I guess we got it worked out all right, and that is that you joined the Army while you were still in the Navy Reserve. And I said, it's the same country, isn't it? You know. So anyway, that was the only thing that seemed to bother them, but we worked through that. Now, in the Navy, or rather in the CIA, it was 1948, and again, I'm 24 years of age at the time. It's 54 years ago. And I started their polygraph section, which is still active there. And also, I was part of a team that could travel anywhere in the world to investigate unusual tactics that may be used for interrogation, because again, we were worried again about the Soviets possibly using hypnosis, etc. It ended up being sort of more of a crude brainwashing than hypnosis, but I had some interesting trips chasing down rumors of tactics that were used. And from there on, it's sort of classified. And I left government to head the Keeler Polygraph Institute in 1950, which was the only training school for polygraph examiners at the time. And I started my own polygraph consultant business in 1951. And I've been self-employed ever since, and done a lot of consultant work. Started the Baxter Research Foundation in 1965. And hadn't yet hooked up the first plant. I don't know that I was sort of getting ready. I started it saying this is for the improvement of polygraph technique, but a year later in 1966 is when I hooked up the first plant, which was this Dracaena cane plant, and I was sort of curious as to the length it took the water of that plant to go up through, again, the trunk and out the leaf. I think we are ready for another slide here. This is it, way back. Now, this particular plant I still have in San Diego. I brought it from New York City back out to San Diego. It has grown so tall that it's up against a 10-foot ceiling, pushing against the acoustic tile up there. I had to remove some of it so it could go up even further. And I think every time I brag about it, it sort of grows another inch, regardless of where I am. So this is the plant that started it all. It's still hanging right in there, okay? Now this is sort of a clamping device here, just using a C-clamp that you use in drafting, putting some insulation here, flattening out 2 GSR galvanic skin response electrodes that we use for conventional polygraph, glue them with the rubber insulation so it doesn't short out, and you're actually testing through the plant leaf. And this is, for all of my earlier work was done with galvanic skin response because I had lots of polygraph equipment around, having a school. In fact, now, see, the next class will be my 162nd class teaching polygraph to mostly police officers, and 162 classes. The only reason I've sort of stayed with it that long is a stable sort of income to where I can then finance, mostly self-finance as far as my research is concerned. I found the only stable way for funding is, if you can do it, to fund yourself. Otherwise, it gets a little bit spotty, and I think we've heard some discussions about that. Okay, let's have another one, Jim. Okay, this is the conventional polygraph that records the strength and the rate of each pulse beat, and any changes in blood pressure, which is sort of a curve here. And the breathing and irregularities in breathing. Here you see a little baseline breathing activity, but the thing that I was interested in is the galvanic skin response, which supposedly measures resistance changes in the skin, and most of the psychophysiologists state that it's perspiration changes, but when I hook it to plants, I don't think that's a very logical explanation. I think what is happening between those electrodes is, with the galvanic skin response, it's a Wheatstone bridge-based circuitry, and you send through a certain amount of electricity, and you sort of watch to see how much comes back. This is like an regular ohm meter, but you don't want sources of electricity in the pathway. Well, here we have sources of electricity. We have millions of cells, each that are capable of discharging significant amounts of electricity. So if there is a surge of electrical activity, it would look as though there's a drop in resistance and create a pattern very similar to that, which is what I was seeing with the plants. Okay. This is the, in hooking up that Dracaena cane plant, this is the first minute from here to here, 6 inches a minute. And instead of seeing this tracing sort of work its way up, which I had expected, which would show me there's a drop in resistance, it went down, which was, if it were a human, it would be sort of boredom or going towards sleep. Here I brought the thing up, it continued to travel downward here. Here it showed me something interesting. This contour is very similar to a GSR reaction with a human. The next slide will show that. Here we took that from that original, and here is a typical GSR arousal with a human being. So you can see if you smooth this out. The reason these serrated edges are there is that the electrical activity that comes from the plant, the cells are separated from each other, they're insulated, and the electrical discharge is directly up into the electrode plate. With a person, it sort of evens itself out like a capacitor when you're dealing with the human. Okay, now the next one. I thought, well, this plant isn't showing me an awful lot, just a little jagged edges here. I wondered here, what can I do? It did want to sort of show me people-like reactions. I wondered what I can do to threaten the well-being of a plant. With a person taking a polygraph test, if they tell a lie about a serious crime, it's a fear of detection of deception. What could be equivalent, as far as the plant is concerned? And I tried a couple things. I tried dipping a neighboring leaf, the one that was hooked up, into a cup of coffee that in the early years I said was hot, and each time I tell the story it's cooler now because it's pretty cruel. And nothing happened. There was no reaction on the tracing. So this is about 13 minutes and 55 seconds along in the original observation. And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to burn that plant leaf. And the imagery of fire came into my mind. I wasn't touching the instrumentation. I was about 10 or 15 feet from the plant. The only new thing that happened, the building was fairly empty, and the only new thing was the thought and intent, the imagery of burning that plant, and it just leaped right up into this wild agitation. To me, this is what you call a high-quality observation, and I must say that from this minute right here, the second, rather 15, the time that's allowed, 13 minutes, I think 55 seconds to here, my life hasn't been the same. I got the point right away. I said, whoa, it's like this plant read my mind. The next one shows the continuation of that. This is the thing that happened there. In this wild agitation, I thought, gee whiz, even if I were to burn the plant, you wouldn't see any difference because there's this great amount of reaction. So I thought, let me remove the threat. So I took the matches back to the secretarial desk in the next office, came back in, and the thing straightened right out to where it had been before, which to me was very, very, very powerful kind of demonstration. Okay, let's have the next one. I wanted to do an experiment before I went public at all with what I thought I was seeing, because I knew scientific methodology as far as I'd been chairman of the Research and Instrument Committee of the Polygraph Professional Organizations for some time, and I wanted to do things correctly. So I wanted to do a very carefully structured experiment before I allowed this to go public as far as the media is concerned. And also I wanted to interact with scientists in the field to see if they could explain the things that were going on. Actually, there are something like 34 universities and honor societies of science, et cetera, that I had presented before allowing this thing to go totally public. And the experiment had to involve, I'd found over the years that the plants, by just letting them run for a considerable period of time, showed great sensitivity to the effect of any living thing in the lab. Insects and so things of that nature, that if you were to accidentally step on an insect and got a big plant reaction, the thing I would do is let it run for hours, and when I saw a big reaction, I would try to chase back and see the thing that caused it. Letting the plant tell me rather than me tell it what I wanted to have happen. So I thought, well, now if I can design an experiment that I will use life form that will be in effect terminated and see if the plant reacts to that, it should be some kind of a good experiment. So I thought, well, what do I use? And because if you start using, you're going to have the anti-vivisectionists against you. And I thought, well, these brine shrimp have heavy karma anyway. They're going to be fed to tropical fish. And if I hurried along just a little bit, it isn't the worst thing in the world. So I used brine shrimp for the stimulus. Here, this cup is only an inch across. You see some brine shrimp in there. Had a little problem about unhealthy brine shrimp. Didn't cause the plants to react when they dropped into water, the boiling water. So how do you give a brine shrimp a physical? You get into that problem. Easy with brine shrimp. You just pick mating pairs, which they love to do, and you got at least one of them healthy, at least in the pair, and put several of these pairs in the cup, and you're going to be sure you've got some healthy brine shrimp that are going to be terminated. Okay. This is a mechanical dump dish device that I designed. This is the middle cup with a brine shrimp in it, and heaters, and we had a little paddle that kept the water at uniform temperature, and then a little fan that blew air across the bottom so it didn't preheat the cups. And the thing that happened is when the cup inverted and dumped the brine shrimp into the simmering water and terminated them, the plants were hooked up in the other end of the laboratory. The next one I think will show that. This was the setup. This is the dump dish device here. This is that programmer. There was a mechanical programmer that I made. I think I have a slide on. And then there was a time delay switch to allow us to get out of the lab and not be in the lab at the time that the experiment was in progress. And then here we had an instrument room with 4 polygraphs, each of 3 attached to plants in 3 separate rooms. During the run, the doors were all closed, etc. I won't get into a lot of detail because we'll run short of time. Okay, main thing is that the brine shrimp were automated, the dump was automated into the simmering water here, and the plants were reacting down here. And the programmer made a record of this. I'm not sure if we have a picture. I think the next one is of the programmer. This is an old chart drive from a polygraph and a whole bunch of discs with niches in them that could run up to about 20 circuits, and these little pins that would go out back and forth. There were 4 of those, and they could either go up or down. They were switching machines for electric trains, and by reversing the polarity, you could have it pip up or pip downward. And I got all the information I needed that you people easily do with computers nowadays. You just program the computer, but this was back then was the it did the job, but by today's standards, it'd be pretty crude. Okay, the next one. Okay, now getting off that, by the way, the data was good on that, and the report was published, the evidence of primary perception in plant life. And by the way, I've used primary perception as my terminology of the things that are going on, because I'm finding them at the plant level. I'm finding them, as we are going to see later on, at the bacterial level, in eggs, etc. And the only ones that seem to be out of the loop are the humans. So I think this is a basic capability. And then, of course, later on, I'm going to say that in separating living cells from the human and testing these cells in vitro away from the donor, the cells will react strongly to the emotions of the donor. So down at the cellular level, we're with it. Somehow at the conscious level, we haven't quite gotten it all together, with rare exception. So basically some things that happened here, for instance, I got into testing chicken eggs. And this happened to be this was a fertile chicken egg, and this was from Frederick, Maryland. I happened to notice, and you can see the times where I work in my lab. This is 3:35 a.m. and so forth. The building was empty pretty much, and there were not a lot of disturbances within the lab. And all I did here, my Siamese cat, Sam, an Aries Siamese cat, if any of you have Siamese cats, they are tough. They came out, walking out from the back room, and I had the audacity to pick this cat up without his permission. And they don't like this. And when I looked in at the tracing on this egg, as I picked up the cat, we get this big reaction, which I've just seen dozens of these things over the years, where you'll see all kinds of interaction of life forms in the area. If you just keep your eyes open, look for them, let them show you, not you make things happen. Okay, the next one. This is Sam. You can see with the nails and so forth. Siamese. Okay, the next one. Now, this is an African violet. When I was doing this work with eggs, this you can see I'm planning to break egg 59. I did a lot of work with eggs. By the way, when you hook electrodes to the eggs, all kinds of things are going on, all kinds of cyclic stuff that goes on inside that egg. And in this particular case, here I'm testing the African violet, but I made a plan to break this egg. Now, here, this is what happened on the tracing of, let's see, of the African violet when I made the plan to break this egg 59. Now, when I broke the egg, nothing happened, because I found that when you are giving a little advance notice that you're going to do something that's somewhat destructive, the life forms will go into something very similar to a state of shock, or fainting in effect, so it doesn't feel any displeasure. So here, just the idea of doing it caused the reaction that was picked up by the African bile, but doing it itself, there's nothing, it's just straight lining. So I found that as a common denominator in many of the observations that I've made. Okay, the next one. This is one where I had worked all night, and here it's 6 something or other in the morning, 6:24, and I'd forgotten to eat dinner the night before, and I was hungry, yet I didn't want to go out in the Times Square area and wander around there at that time of the morning. Mayor Giuliani hadn't cleaned up Times Square quite yet, and so I decided, well, I've got all these eggs here, why should I go hungry? So I put a little pan of water on the hot plate and brought the pan to a boil. And in the meantime, egg number 1 is in a little lead-lined box, with as much shielding as I could, and is making the tracing. So this is egg 1 that's making this tracing. Here I took egg 2 and 3 and dropped them into this boiling water. Egg 2 here, 3 seconds later, egg 3. Now, at the time it takes for the penetration of the heat into the egg, look at the pairs of reactions that we're getting here, here, downward here, etc. So here again, this was interesting to me, and I jumped into action thinking, wow, here I've got a repeatable experiment, maybe. And I spent a lot of time building this turntable that would hold 9 eggs, and I had little corn plasters on it so the eggs wouldn't roll off. It was a phonograph turntable, no friction, and it would advance at 7, 8, and 9 minute intervals. It would advance forward, and a little mechanical boot would kick the egg off the turntable down this little chute. It would flip a micro switch as it went by, and then go into a deep fry full of boiling water. And then we'd have a time delay switch and leave the lab while this is going on, because if you're in the lab, a lot of these things will focus on you and not on these subtleties that are in the lab. So this was, I thought, well, I spent a lot of time putting this thing together, and the best success I had is when returning, I would have 9 hard-boiled eggs. There was no doubt about that, but only a reaction from the first one. So when the first one goes into the water, it's giving the word to the other 8, the jig is up, and they go like this, and there's nothing more that happened for many of those eggs that go on afterwards. Now I found if you wait about 20 minutes, then the reactivity will come back again, and there's some interesting stuff go along that line. So the failures are very important too, because you learn a lot by them. Now this is interesting. At least I think it is. I'm not sure who else I can get excited about it. These little pulsations here, notice it almost looks like a cardio pattern on a human. It's not. This is on a chicken egg. And it's a galvanic skin response where I figured out a way to electrode the egg without making any punctures in the egg by boiling a couple little sponge pieces and a little salt in the water, a little saline. Put them on each side of the egg. The saline solution will soak through the eggshell to the skin on each side. Put the electrodes right on that, and you can get beautiful tracings of the eggs without being intrusive. But here I'm getting these pulsations that turns out to be the accurate pulsation rate of an egg that would be around 3 days in incubation. Interesting, because as it turns out, this is a non-fertile egg. It can't multiply, it can't even start to do cellular division, etc. But here we have something equivalent to the force field that we might call the etheric field that scientists haven't figured out how to handle yet. Like twins, why does one look exactly like the other? We've done very sophisticated work at the cellular level, but why does each cell get in the right place to make the appearance of one twin the same as the other? So in metaphysics we say, well, that's the etheric body. It's there first and it guides the cells to get in place. Well, here apparently we have something that is going to guide the circulatory system if it could only get off the ground by having some kind of fertilization of the egg. In metaphysics, I understand that it's the female principle that guides the circulatory system. So here the egg, which is a female product, is doing its thing, but it can't go anywhere. So now if people wanted to get into the origin of life kind of research, this would be wonderful to start in with this and see if they can't delineate a little better what this etheric field is. Okay. Yogurt, next thing, bacteria. The only reason I got involved in bacteria is I had opened a carton of bacteria back in the lab in New York, and I kept some in the refrigerator when I got hungry. And when I took the spoon and turned the strawberry jam in the bottom of the bacteria up into the yogurt, I got this big reaction from the plant that I was just doing random monitoring with. I wasn't expecting a thing. I had it hooked to a tone generator, and the tone generators go to moaning along, monotone, and then it went, just wild with the tone change. And then I knew that something important had happened. And I said, well, the only thing I did was put a spoon in the yogurt and start to stir it up. I wasn't even aware at that time that there were live bacteria in yogurt. And so I got my dairy bacteriology books out and found, yes, indeed, there are two kinds of bacteria. And this started my whole entree into the testing of bacteria. And bacteria, especially in yogurt, are just fantastically attuned to human emotionality in the area. You can stick 2 electrodes in the yogurt. You must now use EEG type instrumentation, not GSR, because there's some moisture in the yogurt, and if you are passing electricity through the electrodes, you're going to get bubble displacement, electrolysis, etc. But with EEG, you're merely taking the electrical signals out and magnifying them and presenting them. And you can have yogurt. I've done hundreds of hours of yogurt monitoring now, and you can have a debate going on with this yogurt and the tracing being made. And when somebody gets an idea of coming up with a good point, you get a huge reaction at the imagery, and then the words come out. Then you got the counterpoint, same thing happening, and it goes on and on. Just the bacteria in yogurt, they're tuned into you. You may not be tuned into them. Okay, so I've done a lot of work with that. And that's led to other kinds of bacteria too. The next one. This is the way that you can electrode the yogurt. You take a 5 milliliter test tube, and you have to use a little syringe and squirt the yogurt from the bottom up in here. I started then using silver wire, now use gold wire, and going right into the EEG type equipment, and the signals are very sizable. They're not subtle signals. Okay, the next. This is what I use to fill that. I sort of reverse the order of this. This tube goes down to the bottom of the 5 milliliters, and you squirt it carefully up, and you can fill it. Okay, the next one. Now this is interesting because here are 2 different kinds of bacteria that are involved here. When I moved out to California, the first lab location I was at in San Diego for 3 years was a long drawn-out wooden lab before I moved to where I've been ever since. And I had put a pipping device in there to where the rooms at the length of this lab had a little switch that I could push, and it would mark the chart way up at the beginning in the front of the lab, in the front room. This stopped me from running up and marking things on the chart while it was in progress. Well, in this particular case, I had just installed the system, and it was time to feed my Siamese cat, Sam, who had gotten hooked on chicken and wouldn't eat anything else. And of course, they convinced me of that, he did. So, is that a signal? Or just, okay. Okay. I thought, well, okay, my partner's wife, Mary Ann Henson, who is still with me running the school, my partner, Bob Henson, a 32-year partner, died a number of years ago. And she would roast the chicken, send it in with Bob, and I would strip off a little bit of this chicken each day to feed the cat. And after several days, that chicken started to get pretty ripe. It would be put back in the refrigerator, but there are unfriendly bacteria starting to build on it. So this was one of those days that was pretty late along with this chicken being stripped. And I didn't know what to expect at all. When I went about the feeding, I just stripped the chicken, took it out of the refrigerator, stripped the chicken, turned it over, put it under the heating lamp on one side, then the other, then down for the cat to eat. But then when I went back to check and identify these pips that were done at various phases of this process, here I'm removing the chicken from the refrigerator, here stripping the chicken, which is disturbing the bacteria on the chicken, and the thing that's being monitored here are the yogurt bacteria, the friendly yogurt bacteria. That's the sensor. And the chicken is on, the unfriendly bacteria is on the chicken. Now here is where I finished stripping the chicken here, put it under the heating lamp. Look at this, when the heating lamp, heat starts to penetrate. The next one is a continuation of that. Turned the cold chicken from the bottom over to the top. Look at this again. And then set it down. Here the cat comes up, starts to eat. the chicken. Bacteria hits the digestive juices of the chicken, the jig's up, the signal goes out, everything goes flat. Seeing this time and time again. Perhaps it's the reason for saying blessings before you ingest food. Because, again, you're giving a notification of your intention to ingest, and you give the food a chance to get into this tranquil state. Okay, so this is friendly versus unfriendly bacteria. Okay, next. Okay, let's jump on into the human cells. This is the double X or triple X part of my presentation, and involves my curiosity about human cells in vitro. And so my early observation involved sperm, which are single-cell organisms, human level. And I must say, with the repeatability requirements of today in the scientific community, this experimenter has lived too many years for repeatability. But it was exotic, and I soon dropped the idea of using the sperm, changing to something else, but it was the thing that opened the door to where the sperm, with the wire electrodes into the sperm hooked to the EEG, and the donor, who is somewhat anonymous at this point, here broke an amyl nitrite capsule, fumes hitting the fingers from that amyl nitrite capsule, then the inhalation of the fumes of the amyl nitrite. This is for the dilation of blood vessels for people who are prone towards stroke, etc. And this is what's happening several rooms away with the doors closed and the EEG tracing of that sperm sample. So this told me right away is, hey, at the cellular level anyway, humans have this capability. So let's see what else we can do. So, okay, now this is where I finally got around to where I was attending a meeting. In fact, Hal Puthoff was at the same meeting here in Texas. It was in Houston, Texas, and there was a dental researcher from the University of Texas School of Dentistry that was at that meeting. And I was explaining my plight a little bit about not wanting to be so exotic, even though it's scientifically proper, it's politically stupid to continue with the sperm. And he said, well, I got some ideas for you. I'm doing a lot of work with gingivitis, and I collect human leukocytes. And I do computer count of the leukocytes, and I can do diagnostic things as far as their dental condition is concerned. So he, after the talk, after Hal gave a presentation that I did, this was at their home, and they invited some special people in. And I think Life After Life, who's that, Johnson? Moody, but there's another one too that wrote a book that. Richie. Is it, anyway, one of them was there that were into that. There were a group of us, and at the end of their presentations, he said, "Come on in. I'll drive you into town, open up my lab, and show you how to collect these cells." So this started the methodology of collecting oral leukocytes by using a little saline solution, munching on the solution for the respondent that you're going to collect cells from. The cells migrate out through the gums, etc., and then you centrifuge the solution. And by the way, I have a report, and I brought a number of these with me, and it's called Biocommunication Capability, Human Donors and In Vitro Leukocytes. It gets into the methodology and so forth, and I have a pile of those that I put out on the book desk. There's no charge for them at all. They're free. And you just go over, and they happen to be right next to this other book that I'm more interested in. You also looking at The Secret Life of Your Cells, and this book is by Bob Stone, Robert Stone, the late Robert Stone, in fact. And I carefully collaborated with him in this book. It gets into a lot of the plant stuff, and I think you'll enjoy it very much, and it gets into the human cells in vitro. And there's a pile of these out there, so on the way out you can stop by and pick some up. Okay. Now, after doing this, I wanted to get my equipment and get right into the cell collection business, and I had to get a centrifuge and a few little things, which I finally got. And so here I am collecting my own white cells here, and this is the tracing up to this point. Now, at this point, I'm looking for some sterile lancets on the shelf in my lab, and I want to make a little nick in my skin because I thought if I could put some iodine in that cut, perhaps I could get some reaction from these oral leukocytes. Well, here you get the reaction of my intention to do that, and my looking with this devious plan of what I'm going to do to get reactions. The reaction occurs there, and when I cut and put the iodine in, nothing happens at all, because you've already notified the cells that you're going to do this. They've gone insensitive, and the reaction isn't forthcoming. So here again, this is the experimenter effect that you have to be very careful of in biological work, because you, by your design, your preconceptions may be changing the very experimental result that you're looking to obtain, not realizing that you're doing it. Okay, next one. This is the electroding configuration for the white cell, the 1 milliliter test tube, gold wires going in here. This goes right to the biological preamp and driver amp. And these are not subtle signals. These are huge signals. So you don't need a lot of magnification. Okay. Now, this is an example. A fellow, Steve White, that came to work with me while he was going through college, and I had some limited funding that would allow him to come in part-time. And Steve is a Scorpio. A lot of you, that may or may not mean anything. And something came up about Playboy magazine, an article that was in Playboy magazine. And I said, well, I think my partner at that time, who was teaching in the school I mentioned, was also a Scorpio. So he had this Playboy magazine down in his desk on the second floor of the building, and I was on the 5th. So I went down and found it, and I said, okay, Steve, let me put this camera over your shoulder and have the magazine in view, and you've already collected your own white cells using this procedure, and let's see what happens. So here again, Steve is plowing through until he gets to the centerfold of Bo Derek here. And you can see the thing really went crazy up and down. This is example number 1 of 12 examples in this reprint. And the next one. And here, I said, Steve, why don't you just close the magazine and see if things will settle down, which he did here, and they quieted down again. And over here, he said, well, he's going to double-cross me a little. He reaches for the magazine, and as he's reaching for it, this big spike occurs. Then you hear his hand hit the table afterwards, where the timing is really precise. And so here again, this was his February 2nd, 1966. For me, the thing that really turned me on, this was for him. Again, much later, but I had no problem with him because when he came to work with me, he was majoring in marine biology at San Diego State University, and he'd already been to Science 101, so he knew all the things you can't do, but he needed the money. After this, no problem. He was with the program because it was his mind. He saw what was happening. He did it himself, which is great. If we can get more people to do things like this themselves, maybe we can really turn them on. Okay, the next one. Okay, that's the end of the slides there. Okay. Now, the question comes up of the kind of communication that we seem to be dealing with here. And again, let's see if we got okay down the line. Your cells for reception, okay. Again, getting back to these publications that are available now, The Secret Life of Plants is a book that first came out with this, as far as a book form is concerned. And the first edition of The Secret Life of Plants by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird was 1973, hardcover. In 1974, Avon Publishing came out with a paperback. In 1989, right up to the present, Harper & Row came out with a quality paperback. This book has been 29 years in constant publication, which is very unusual for a book. So it just shows you that there's that feeling. The first couple of chapters are about my work, and then Christopher Bird and Peter Tompkins got into all kinds of things that people may not have paid a lot of attention to had it not had something new at the beginning to grab them. Now, Secret Life of Your Cells, 1989 by Robert Stone, it's a quality paperback. And again, there's a supply of these out there for those of you who want to study further into this. And by Robert Stone, Japanese translations in the 6th publication. Japs get the point. Buddhist, Eastern philosophy, and so forth. We're about the second or third here in the States of limited publication. Now, I finally decided that maybe I ought to do a book myself, and I'm pretty far along into it. In fact, it must get out this year, and the book is going to be called Primary Perception, which is, I think, sort of describes what we're dealing with, something that's very primary right at the beginning. And it will be due out in fall of this year, and I'll be the author, and Francie Prouse is the editor, and she's helping me a lot with the electronic part where we can self-publish. And you can get more than 30 cents. I get 30 cents when you buy one of these. Big deal. Robert Stone gets, his widow gets the other 30 cents. And that's it. The bookstores do much better. But by self-publishing, I've agreed that I'm going to contribute all my royalties to the Research Foundation to keep the thing going. And also, I've tried to finance my Research Foundation by any quality control review that I do with polygraph charts that involve cases. I get involved in some pretty good cases sometimes. The John Benet Ramsey case and the McDonald, the Green Beret, a whole bunch of them, but I contribute every dollar that I get for fee in that to the Research Foundation. And this is the way I've been able to survive in maintaining my lab, and it's a pretty good sized lab. It's about 2,000 square feet. It's the old Drug Enforcement Agency lab. They moved closer to the border, and in 1977, from this first place that I mentioned that I was at for 3 years, they went closer to the border. This had all of the permanent stuff that was in there that they didn't take with them, things that you would die for in a laboratory, and it would cost a fortune. 109 steel drawers for storage, and all kinds of counters, and 3 sinks, and a fume hood going up to the roof, and all wiring, everything. So I was able to walk into that just for the floor footage. Now, again, the greed of real estate people and landlords has tripled that now, so it gets a little bit of a hardship, but I've still hung right on to it because it's such a wonderful opportunity. I can't afford a apartment and a lab, so I live in the back of the lab. I, as a scientist, spend more time in the lab than probably any scientist in the world because I live there. Got my commuting worked out, everything's fine. So I can get up if I have an idea. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, I'll stagger out and fire things up, check it out, and then go back to bed again. So this is the way I like it. My 2 Siamese cats now that are there that are really quite a joy to watch. When you watch cats and the interaction, you have to have 2 of them to do this, and the games that they play with each other are fantastic. And when I'm monitoring something on my equipment, these little games will show up. If the one cat is chasing the other and circles around the other way and confronts the first cat, and the tail goes up, big reaction on the if I'm testing bacteria or plants and you see this time and time again. These are spontaneous. Now this brings up the big problem as far as the scientific community is concerned of repeatability. I have found that spontaneity and repeatability just do not go together. They really don't. And the point of some sources in the scientific community not paying attention to your research because it's not repeatable. And here you've got hundreds of high-quality observations, any one of which is a real mind-turner, to say that this is unimportant because you can't make the very same thing jump through the hoop 10 times in a row. It seems to miss the point. Now, the work I'm doing with white cells has a lot of holistic health implications, white cells being part of the immune system, and the idea that your thoughts are permeating every cell of your body, shortcutting, not going through the nervous system. Going directly means you better be careful of the quality of your thoughts, because if you're a negative thinker, you may be creating lots of your own problems. And we don't know this to be true, but you might be creating problems for other people in the immediate vicinity. That needs a little looking into. So there are lots of implications. The important thing is, though, that with the white cells, some of the stuff over distance has been very, very interesting. You're going to see in this report there are examples that involve things that happen in the lab, a few blocks away, 10 or 15 miles away, and let's see, the book by here we are. Brian O'Leary in his book, Exploring Inner and Outer Space, any of you have that book? You have a whole section in that book about his experience with his white cells left at my lab. He was living at the time 300 miles away in Phoenix, and we allowed his white cells to continue making the tracing in San Diego, and he was keeping a very careful timetable of the incidents that might be sort of riling him up a little bit, standing in line at the airport. His son didn't meet him on time at the other end of the line. He almost had an accident. Another number of little points to check. And here at 300 miles, we're getting the reactions back in San Diego just as huge as though he was right there next to the equipment. And when you do this kind of work, you have to vacate the lab yourself because you will contaminate the readings. These cells will pick up the emotional state of the donor, but they will also pick up anything going on in the immediate vicinity where they're located. So you have to vacate the lab, automate the procedure, and you just get all kinds of extremely interesting stuff. Seems to have a lot of potential. The nature of the communication, I keep telling people the way I've sort of stayed in this business for 36 years without being discredited is not to try to explain how it happens, to leave the explanation to others and just keep churning out high quality observations and let them explain it, because if you give a explanation that people can fault, even to a limited degree, they throw out your good observations with your bad explanation. But the thing that I'm seeing more and more, and I believe Russell Targ mentioned this about non-time-consuming communication. The terminology would be the non-local communication or non-locality. We were both at a Deepak Chopra meeting in La Jolla very recently, and the staff, they were almost all quantum physicists, weren't they, on that staff? And this is all they talked about is non-locality all the way through the thing. So it made me so happy because it gives me someone to refer an inquiry to, saying, hey, talk to the quantum physicists. They seem to have it lined up. They seem very comfortable with the idea that I'm dealing with non-locality, not only in the limited local basis, but at great distances, because the size of the reactions, the subtlety of the reactions that we're getting in the lab would certainly dissipate over a distance if they were distance limited. And the thing that I asked him right away, I said, well, gee whiz, you talk about non-locality, how long would it take for something on the other side of the universe to become aware of something going on here? And I'm waiting for them to give me anything where you multiply it by the light years that are involved would still be far too long. And they say 0 seconds. In other words, when it happens here, happening there at the same time as it's happening here. This is important. This gives all kinds of a new approach, new understanding, if you do need it, as far as spiritual concepts are concerned, of prayer, meditation. We don't know where God is hanging out. This could be a minor planet with lots of problems. God could be somewhere on the other side of the universe. And how do you expect your word, your prayers, etc., to get to him if you're dependent on the speed of light, electromagnetic spectrum? If there is something that is instantaneous, as it seems very much that we can show, this should shed a whole new light on that entire aspect as far as spirituality is concerned. When I talk to Japanese scientists and scientists from India, all they say is, what took you so long? When I talk to the American scientists, well, even the Russians were ahead on the game. They, 1973, I attended a psychotronic, so it was the first international meeting of the Psychotronic Association in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And Ingo Swan was, is Ingo still here? Ingo was at that meeting. In fact, we stopped by the way of Egypt. And we wanted to find out what was going on as far as the Sphinx is concerned. We thought some pretty interesting stuff was going on. And it turns out that Ingo and Peter Tompkins, who also was rendezvousing with us there, did not get along too well. and it produced a atmosphere that was less than conducive, let's say, to meaningful psychic impressions about the Sphinx. I thought they were going to kill each other, in fact. But we went from there on to Prague. This is where Christopher Bird showed up. He drove from someplace in Europe to the conference, and he had this great big beard that Christopher Bird used to have. He got up to the border, and they said, let's see your passport. He showed the passport. Didn't have a beard on. They made him shave the whole beard off before they would let him through the border. And at that one, I was in charge of the man-plant-animal communication section. It was one of 7 sections that were there. So really, having been involved in this for 36 years, I'm not discouraged. I think we're making lots of headway. There's still resistance, but to me, I'm 78 years of age now, and I still plan to keep it on going as long as I can. So 59 years working with polygraph, 36 years with biocommunication work. And I think that you just keep busy, keep your life interesting. It's a good therapy. Okay, I think with that we're going to be cutting pretty short on time, and I want to leave a little room for questions if we can. I don't say I can answer them, but is that okay with the powers that be here? Yes.
Thank you. It's fascinating. I noticed that in a lot of your examples, you have a system where there is a sensing organism and then perhaps a transmitting organism, and the two interact. But it seems to me that this system is entirely defined by your mind only, and that there are other organisms in the total system that could be interacting here, like neighbors next door, or animals outside, or bugs on the floor that get squashed. So how is it that what do you think about the limits that you have imposed by your own mind on the system that is
I've worked very hard, in fact, to address that problem by automating the experiment and leaving the lab, where I'm not in the lab at the time that the automated experiment is running. Also, where I conduct my research at 2 and 3 in the morning when the building is empty. So I'm very aware of that. And there are some pretty well-defined geographical areas that the sensor that you're using will be attuned to. It will be attuned to the interconnected rooms that people can sort of move about, and it will be attuned to the donor wherever the donor is, but not in between.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that you're actually part of this experiment, whether you acknowledge it or not, by defining the domain of the experiment.
Well, I'll settle for that too. If you happen to be right, it's still interesting. No, I think we work hard to try to address that, though. Yes.
I have another question back over here.
Yes.
Have you done any experiments with inanimate objects and threats against living organisms or vice versa?
I'm getting interested in these so-called inanimate objects that probably aren't too inanimate. I have a book by the Rosicrucians that the author is something about anonymous whatever. They're not big on telling you who the author is, but that book has been so accurate on things that I want to try. And they get into the business of as below, so above, that kind of thing, that the things that you look at microscopically below are really a pattern for the universe as you extend outward. And the closest I've come so far is to take the so-called inanimate particles and suspend them in agar-agar or agar-agar and a little plug, and put electrodes in each side of that. And I'm getting electrical discharge, but I'm not getting contours that are extremely meaningful. So I suspect that we can get into that. Yes, I think there's a lot of things that could be done with that. I haven't personally done it, but I do look forward to trying it. Yes?
Well, actually, we got the question. We're going in line here. This is okay? Here's your question.
Have you or anybody that you know attempted to quantify delay times of these types of transmission by these bioorganisms? In other words, do they obey the speed of light? And a second quick question, can these things be jammed inadvertently or purposely?
Okay, your first question is one that I sort of addressed by saying I do not think they are consuming time. And again, at Earth distances, we can't really support a firm answer on that, because even to the moon, you may have a second, maybe two, I'm not sure what it is, the transmission time by speed of light, but the biological delays before the reaction actually sets in can absorb that. And the thing that I've wanted to do in the space program is to get some significant distance, such as a manned Mars probe or even perhaps a automated probe, where you had cell culture there. For instance, if you had a manned probe, it would be neat. You could have the person leave a sample of their cells in the Earth, and if they had problems, let's say you're at a 20-minute transmission time wherever you are in a particular orbit on Mars, if things came back instantly, and then 20 minutes later you got the cry for help on the radio or something of that nature, this would answer the problem. So I think it's something that we could determine and justify an answer if we get sizable distances. I suspect strongly, though, that it's going to be non-time consuming. I think we're getting into this non-locality thing. And to me, I'm so happy that the quantum physicist is there to handle that. Right.
Okay, thank you. Got a question here, there, and then back over here.
Oh, by the way, the business about jamming this, no, we haven't figured out any way to jam this. We've used very sophisticated shielded room at California Institute for Human Science. It's a top-grade shielded room, and it hasn't stopped a thing. We've been able to put equipment and the material being tested on the inside and outside with the door shut, et cetera. The charts are still picking up, and the interaction seems to be very, very good observationally. Yes. No, go ahead.
Have you ever conducted hypnosis-induced remote viewing experiments while having the subject hooked up to your polygraph equipment at the same time? And if so, would the results of that polygraph equipment reflect the physical accuracy of their remote viewing, or would it reflect their belief about the accuracy of that remote viewing?
That's a good, complicated question. You're talking about different phases of my involvement. For instance, when I was doing the hypnosis and some observational stuff that would resemble remote viewing, I wasn't yet into polygraph. And then the polygraph phase came along later, but I agree these would be neat things to do. In fact, if we can get miniaturized equipment that would telemeter various physiological functions on a chart, so you don't encumber the person so much by having them hooked up and immobilized, it would be very interesting to see that those things, what would happen. I haven't done it, but I would like to do it. Let's put it that way.
All right, we have a question here, and then one more.
I worked with a teacher experiment over here. Anyhow, how many millivolts or how many ohms are we looking for when you hook up to a plant when they're having a little wiggle that you shut on chart board?
It's marked on the material. In fact, I have little pips on there that show on most of those. I didn't get into that. With the galvanic skin response, at about 1/10 of our sensitivity setting, we can get full-scale swings. So we don't use much sensitivity at all in the galvanic skin response circuitry. So these are huge signals. And the others are certainly, the eggs are in the millivolt range. And with the cells, they're microvolt range, but they're very perceivable. They're not subtle.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Yes.
Important one, I might add.
This is a question about the thousands of suicide bombers today who have been hypnotized, most likely. In your research, did you study trying to block hypnotic suggestion? I'm asking about the potential of intentions of the rest of us, like prayer, to block programmed suicide bombers.
Well, I think that they're virgin denied. Most of those people, they're promised all these virgins when they get to heaven, and I'm not sure they're hypnotized. In other words, I really wouldn't know how to answer that, because you're getting into motivations when you get into cultural stuff, where these people, I don't know where they feel so comfortable that there's a life hereafter, that they don't care. To them, it may not be that big a thing. And of course, all these weird promises of how many virgins are they promised? Okay, and whether they're buying into that or not, I don't know. I will tell you this, though. At the end of the Second World War with the kamikazes, we didn't quite know how to handle that as Americans, because we'd never even heard of somebody that would so willingly give up their life. And I've seen 450 people get killed in just a split second with a suicide two-man submarine hitting the magazine on a destroyer escort. And you just don't, and then when we were staging for the invasion of Japan, these people were coming in by the dozens and crashing their planes. Now, we don't understand that kind of mentality, so I'm not sure that that is hypnosis per se. So I wouldn't know how to answer your question of how we could interfere with it without changing their philosophy, really.
Just quickly, did you do any research with trying to interfere with the hypnotic suggestion of somebody?
No, I was very busy trying to show that hypnotic suggestion was real. I wasn't trying to interfere with it, I was trying to make it happen. But I know what you're talking about, yes.
I have a suggestion for you regarding replicability, where your chicken eggs or plants habituate to the oncoming further negative stimulus. In ESP research, often will use a random number generator to run the stimulus. So if you're giving somebody an electric shock or a loud noise in their ears, if you give them that stimulus every 30 seconds or every minute, they'll quickly habituate. But if you give it to them on a random schedule, so they don't know when it's coming, then they don't habituate.
Well, you know, we tried to approach that. I found something with the plants. It's something I would call an intent to return phenomenon. If you leave the lab and you have the plant recording in progress, when you make a spontaneous decision to turn around and go back, there will be a reaction on the plants. And I was able to time that with a stopwatch, et cetera, and I thought, wow, you know, repeatability, this is going to be good. So I put a recording on each of 6 different tapes. And I didn't know which was what, but there was a different time when the beep would sound, and I could play a recorder that I took with me, and that was the time I was going to turn around to come back. And I thought, well, you know, this will take care of that idea of your knowing when it's going to be. And when you'd come back, you'd jack into the system, and it would mark the chart, et cetera. And I found that I was getting a reaction on each of the 6 possibilities. So, I mean, you know, there are interesting things you learn by the failures in that. But I agree with you that there's a lot of work that could be done as far as spontaneous, you know, events are concerned. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting stuff. I have one thing.
Thank you so much.